Welcome, Heroes to Hive students. Today we're going to cover two interrelated topics in this lecture that are going to be very important to you, your productivity as a beekeeper, and the health and productivity of your bees, which is swarms and swarm control and splits. So really, these topics are really important during the beginning of the season, and this lecture is really intended for you to be able to prepare yourself for coming out of winter next season with your overwintered colonies, or if you're getting into beekeeping for the first time, this likely won't be something that you'll be dealing with brand new colonies, but it's something that you would be aware of during the important part of the season. So let's jump into it and talk a little bit about some of the techniques that we use to split colonies, and then I'm going to leave you with a swarm control technique as well. All right. So we've covered swarms in the previous lecture and even some swarm prevention techniques. So I'm not going to go back over those details of what we covered in that lecture. And what I'm talking about is the information pertaining to swarm cues, development of a swarm condition, swarm control, or the movement of swarms themselves. So essentially what you need to know and what you should know by now is that swarming is a natural process that bees initiate, in which the old queen leaves the hive with the majority of workers to establish a new hive, and the remainder of the bees and the virgin queen stay in the old hive. Now, recall there's two reasons for hives to swarm. It's either due to their natural reproductive instinct or overcrowding. As a colony comes out of winter, the bees naturally want to reproduce. That's when we're talking about reproducing, that is what we're talking about at the colony level. So this is colony level reproduction, that living superorganism. And really what this is it's part of the survival strategy for the species. So bees have evolved a reproductive strategy that ensures colony replacements of those lost over the winter or to the disease. And ultimately, by doing that through reproduction at the colony level, they're able to successfully proliferate as a species, and that is through a reproductive swarm. In cases of overcrowding, these are swarms that are initiated due to a set of internal hive conditions that cause stress on the colony, like a queen pheromone dilution, brood nest limitations, backfilling, or just clogged space within the hive overall. That swarm impulse in this situation, really, it's to maintain a colony that's, or I guess you can think about the intention of the colony here as being kind of, something to maintain the adequate size or the appropriate size of a colony. So a colony that is overcrowded, a colony that really has a lot of stress on it because of that overcrowding, it's trying to relieve that stress factor. And so that's one of the survival strategies utilized to do that, is through this swarming due to overcrowding. So the organism itself is very well adapted and situated as a biological organism to be able to work well in these two situations, where they are essentially reproducing as a colony due to certain factors that come to play at different times of the year. Reproductive swarming we definitely see happen more in the beginning of the year, and overcrowding swarming can happen at any time. That's really a limitation due to beekeepers not maintaining space. So what we have not covered in the other lectures, on swarm control, we've not covered the art and science of splits and how that relates to swarm control and increasing the size of your apiary. So a split is essentially the intentional process that we as beekeepers take that uses the resources that are available in an overwintered hive to create additional hives. This process leaves the donor hive, the hive that we take the materials from, and the receiver hive, that new split, with all the resources necessary to survive. They have all of the things they need to survive. They have all the things they need to reproduce. Essentially, we're giving them all of the things a full-size colony would have so that it can be successful into the future. And what it does is it leaves you as a beekeeper with a new hive that you didn't have to purchase for, I don't know, nukes are going for like $150 to $200 nowadays. It also allows you to successfully split hives for your long-term success. Part of being a beekeeper is this notion that we keep bees. We don't replace bees all the time due to losses. Those are bee havers, right? You want to be a beekeeper, someone that keeps bees alive from year to year. And the way that we sustainably grow the size of our operation is through splits. An example in my own personal operation, the last time we bought bees was when we moved to Michigan. We bought bees the first year we were here, and I killed every single one of them because I had only been a beekeeper in California and really had never experienced winter in my life to begin with. So it was a very big learning experience that first year. The next year we bought 6 colonies. From those 6 colonies, we are now at, well, our apiary is at around 50 colonies now, but we have been selling nukes every single year as we've been increasing. And so we've been able to completely mitigate the cost of our beekeeping activities by the sale of bees. And those are the types of things that you need to be thinking about, is how are you going to sustain this hobby or this career? The way you do that is not by killing the bees. The way you do that is by getting them to overwinter and making splits and having that income come in at the beginning of the season in the form of selling bees, middle of the season in the form of selling queens, and later in the season by selling honey. And so that way you're building a portfolio in your business plan or even in your hobby where these costs that you're going to incur during beekeeping can be offset by you selling bees due to splitting. In the meantime, splitting is a great way to prevent swarming. So that brings me to my next slide. What can splits accomplish? Well, number one, you can accomplish swarm control. Swarm control is something that's very important at the beginning of the season with overwintered hives. You need to split those hives. If you don't split them, overwintered colonies will just swarm and you'll lose half of your bees. You want to play a role in this, and you can absolutely manage this situation by appropriately approaching the colony. And we talked about this in the other lecture around swarms, is this idea of supering early. So you can increase the size of the storage chamber for them early in the season by adding some supers. Or we talked about doing spring reversals. But you play an active role in this. And so you need to look at this is I oftentimes hear folks kind of think about swarm prevention is like it's this like diabolical imminent thing that they're trying to avoid at all costs. But in actuality, you should be thinking about this as a moment to take advantage of a natural process and utilize it for your own ability to support this venture into beekeeping by the sale of nukes. So you can increase the number of your hives as well as selling nukes. Now, as you're getting bigger and bigger and you want to produce more bees, you want to produce more honey, you have more demand for your products, you want to increase the number of those hives. And the way that you do that in a sustainable manner is by doing splits. In addition, you can also raise queens doing this. So you can take advantage of those queen cells that are being put on as they're getting ready to swarm or as you see a swarm condition developing, and you can put those in other hives. You can make a small split from that. And I'm going to talk about that later on, this idea of a queen rearing split that Michael Bush has I don't know if he's the one who's kind of been pushing it, but it's who I've seen talk about it most is him. So let's take a look at some of these techniques. And I'm going to cover a few of them today as far as types of splits. So we're going to talk about a walkaway split. We're going to talk about a typical split. We're going to talk about an even split. We're going to talk about a side-by-side split. And then I'm going to talk about a swarm prevention technique called the Demaree method. And finally, I'm going to wrap it up with a queen rearing split. So I'm going to give you essentially, what do we got here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different techniques that you can use to split your colonies, to prevent a swarm if you're not interested in splitting, and to rear queens from a small split. So these are going to be things that you're going to be able to use to your advantage next season to really get yourself positioned to not have to buy queens and be able to sustainably increase the size of your apiary when those bees survive the winter this year. All right, so what do you need for your splits and your timing as far as the splits? So really, we want to ensure you have a queen that's either purchased or reared. So this, as you're getting ready to do this, you need to be thinking about where you're going to be getting this from. So if you're going to do this, you've got to do one of two things. So where is your queen going to come from? Well, she's going to either come from eggs, right? So you can raise a queen from eggs, first instar larva, or you can buy one. Those are two options. But there are things that we need to keep in mind that go along with this. So if we are going to say, for example, if we are not going to buy a mated queen, and generally if you're in northern climates and you buy a mated queen, they come from somewhere else. They don't come from Michigan or wherever you live in a northern climate. My queens this year came from my mentor in California. So most of them are shipped from down south or from out west during the earliest part of the season. There's just not we can't raise queens that early in northern climates. We've got to have certain conditions. And what are those conditions that you need? If you're thinking about raising a queen instead of buying a mated queen for a split, well, you need to think about, are there drones flying? There has to be drones available to mate with. If you did a walkaway, if you did a split early on, expecting really early on, and I'm talking, say for example, we get a warm up in April in Michigan, and you decide you're going to do a split right after the warm up, there may not be drones available in the area to support the mating of that virgin queen. And so you have to have drones available, and they need to be flying at this point. And really, when you think about drones, you should be thinking about the conditions that they fly as well. So they actually won't start flying until about 65 degrees, and they're usually about 8 days old before they actually leave the hive for flying. So there's a delay there as well. So even if you see them in the colony, it may not mean that if they're just starting to hatch, it does not mean that they're actually flying. You still got a little extra time with that. So you need to make sure they're available. The other thing you want to make sure is available is food. So bees are going to need nectar and pollen if you're planning on raising a queen. And it needs to be available in the environment, but you can also supplement this as well. But if you don't provision them with the food that they need to rear a brood and support the colony, whether it's coming in from nature or generally in the beginning of the season, you can get into, there's a lot of periods, especially in northern climates, where we're in the beginning of spring and things are happening in the colony as far as brood being reared, but they're not flying a whole lot. And so that's something that you need to consider. Where is the pollen and nectar coming from? The other thing you want available when you're timing your splits is lots of nurse bees in the colonies. Those are going to be really important in helping those splits move along as far as growth is concerned. And so you want to make sure, especially if you're considering rearing a queen, that you have a good, robust nurse bee population to support the rearing of that brood, including that queen that you're looking to utilize. And then finally, what you really want to think about as far as needs in timing your splits is you want to make sure that you have the ability for proper structure of the hive, meaning that you want to make sure that you're always paying attention to how you're orienting these things, and that that you actually have the resources necessary to do this. I like to, it's a balancing act when it comes to timing, timing splits. I will say this, you need to be watching the weather. You want to make sure you have good weather while you're doing splits. You want to make sure that those colonies have the ability to fly a little bit, to get access to resources. And that's really important during that time of the season. But the other thing that you have to also consider is that although some colonies, so the other thing you need to consider is that some colonies will be further along than others. Not all of your colonies may be ready for splits at the same time. Some will build slower than others in the spring. And a prime example that I've seen from my own personal experience is we have Saskatraz colonies as some of our colonies in our apiary. And those colonies always build faster, always seem to hit swarm conditions faster than anything else in the apiary. They don't seem to really lose a lot of bees over the winter. It seems like this massive cluster just comes through the winter, and they are rocking and rolling way before everybody else. So we need to also ensure that we understand the dynamics of our colonies, and that's something that comes along with experience of keeping bees from year to year and really getting to know your bees and what those colonies do. Big factor in that also, being able to do that, is record keeping. And we've talked about that the importance of that in another lecture. But being able to look back at your notes and see who your big, robust hives are and what they were doing when can be very influential in determining when you're going to be timing splits for those particular colonies. Like I said, our Saskatraz colonies always get split first. You have to. If you wait too long, they will be so jam-packed full of bees that you can run the risk of an early season swarm. Okay, so the first split I'm going to introduce you to is called the walkaway split. It's one of the most simple splits that you can do. And really what it is, it's a 5-frame split. Now I'm going to show you an 8 and 10 frame version of this as well. And these are very easy splits that I'm trying to demonstrate to you. I don't want you to think this is a difficult process, because it's really not. It's actually a very simple process dividing these hives up. I think more or less it's just the mystery of all of it. And just the knowledge of what is it, what do I put, where do I put it, those types of things. So I'm going to show you where you put your resources and what you need to do a 5-frame split. So you come to your colony that's over winter. You're going to start going through this colony frame by frame and determining what is on the frames that you're looking at as you're going through the colony. And as you're doing that, you're going to be pulling some of those frames out to build what is essentially a mini hive. A hive nucleus. That's why we call it a nuke. It stands for hive nucleus. It is essentially the nucleus of a colony, all of the components of a colony that a colony has right there in a very small form, in this case, a 5-frame split. So what do you take out of your donor hive and put into your receiver hive, which is this 5-frame nuke here? Well, the first thing you're going to put in, or one of the components that you're going to put in, and the component that's going to go in the middle, is a frame of eggs. This is important to recognize because you want to be able, in this situation, in a walkaway split, where we are actually having a queen bee raised by the colony, you want to ensure that colony has the ability to raise a queen. And the way that they can do that is from an egg or first instar larva. So you want very young brood in this frame. And the reason is because that's where they're going to raise the queen from. So you have your eggs right in the middle, and that is center in the middle of that 5-frame split. Next, you're going to be putting emerging brood next to it. This is capped brood that is going to be hatching relatively soon, and that is going to be the next generation of nurse bees that's going to rear all of the bees that are on that frame in the middle, including your queen. So you need to have a good, robust population of young bees in here to be able to do this. In addition, when you're doing this split, you want young bees on these frames as well. Then generally, the young bees will be hanging out on these brood frames. So you've got 3 frames right here with young bees on it. The next generation of young bees coming out relatively soon in those 2 side frames. And then you've got the following generation on that middle frame, which includes your next queen in that split. So these are your 3 frames you're going to start with. The next things you're going to put in this split is you're going to put one frame on one side that has food, and by food I mean pollen and honey. You generally want to have a good solid pollen frame that is facing the inside. So if you have, say, that last one, either one of these last frames, let me grab my cursor, you want the pollen facing into the middle of the hive where the brood's at. You want those bees to be able, those nurse bees, to be able to turn around, grab that pollen, and put it right back into the brood chamber. And then you also need to have honey on this as well. So you can have honey on the back side of one of these frames, or you could have honey on the frame that has a little bit of an open area. But you want honey as well, and then you want open area. You want a little bit of area for them to continue for them to be able to grow. Now, there's variations. This is not a hard and fast thing. And if you look at some of the video I showed you for how we do splits, oftentimes this can vary. You know, if you, say, for example, don't have 2 frames of emerging brood, I've done them with a frame of eggs and 1 frame of emerging brood, a frame of pollen, a frame of honey, and then a totally empty frame too. So there's variations that you can do on this, and I encourage you to play around with this. The worst thing that can happen in this situation is you don't get this, the colony doesn't get queen right, and you end up recombining it with another colony. But the only way you're going to learn how to do these things is through experience and by actually doing it. And so just have at it. The worst thing you can do is have to recombine this with a queen right colony. That's the worst, okay? The one thing you do want to make sure, though, and I should mention before I go on any further, is as you're doing this and as you're building this, you need to be making sure you know where your queen's at, that she is not in here. Now, if she does get in there, it's not the end of the world. If you come back in a couple days and to check it because you're unsure, if there's no eggs in there after 4 days, you know that there's not a queen in there. But the one thing that you need to keep in mind is that as you're going through this, it's always good to be able to find the queen in these situations. When I'm doing splits, I generally like to know where my queen is. And usually at this time of the season, unless you have these massive Saskatraz colonies, the hive is not that big. And so you generally should have a pretty easy time finding the queen on here. But you want to make sure the queen's not in here. Now, the alternative to this is also you can add a mated queen to this. In this type of a split, you don't have to just walk away and let them raise another queen. That's going to take about 4 weeks. And that's what's going to happen is after you get this put together, you're going to bring it somewhere away from the other hive, and you're going to basically let them raise a queen for 4 weeks and come back in about 4 weeks and check and see if you have eggs at that point. That'll give her enough time to hatch, get mated, and get back and start laying. But you don't have to wait for that 4-week period. What you can do in this situation is, and this is what you saw in the video I did, is you just can add a mated caged queen into this, and you'll be rocking and rolling in a week. And that's a really good strategy if you want to get things moving ahead of schedule. Again, if you're in a situation where you're very early in the season and you want to get things started very early, adding a queen is going to save you a month's time. And you're going to be a month ahead of all of the rest of the colonies that are trying to raise their own queen. So in this situation, you can do this without a queen, or you can do this with a queen. All right, the next version of this walkaway split is where you're actually just splitting the colony, right? And this is a very easy split. This is probably the easiest split out there when it comes to splits. Basically, what you're going to do is, so this box, you see the red circle in here, that is representative of our brood chamber, okay? So this overwintered colony, this is where the brood is. This is our colony that we're starting to build up with in the spring. Now, in this situation, and you may have multiple boxes on this, but the idea is that you're essentially splitting this up. And so what you do is you take these 2 boxes, you split them into 2, you add a bottom board and a top cover to each one, and now you basically are going to let one of them raise a queen, and one of them's going to have a queen. If you want to know which one the queen's in, you can come back in 4 days, and one of them's going to have eggs, and one of them is not going to have eggs. You can then, at that point, you could decide that you want to have them raise that queen, or you could add a queen. Now, in this situation, if we add the queen, we call that another type of split. We call that the typical split. So just a little terminology change there. But essentially, the difference between a walkaway and a typical split, whether it's a 5-frame or an 8-frame or a 10-frame, is essentially either the adding of a queen or the raising of a queen. In a walkaway situation, you're allowing a queen to be raised. In a typical situation, you're adding a mated queen. So both very easy processes. But if you're going to add a queen, you got to wait those 4 days. Make sure, or if you've seen the queen, if you know which box she's in, that's one thing. But if you don't know which box she's in, it's very easy to determine that when you come back after those 4 days, and one has eggs and one does not. All right. Another split is called even split, which is a lot like what we just talked about, but it's a little bit more. I guess the big thing with the even split is kind of direction of the hives. So you can see I have an arrow. This is a 4-box stacked hive. You can see I have an arrow facing south. Let's just say for argument's sake, that's the direction the hive is facing. The thing about the even split is essentially you're evenly splitting up all the resources between 2 colonies. So you split up all those resources. Oh, here's I did some fancy animations for you guys. I guess I had a little too much time on my hands, which is never the case. But I added some bees in here for you. So you see the bees flying around. They're going out and they're foraging. So you have all your foragers going out. So as you come to this colony, what you need to, as you're getting ready for this split, is you're going to observe the directions that the hives are facing. So your donor hive is facing south, and you're going to face the receiver hives east and west. So they're going to be facing each other, kind of like they're exactly, they're 90 degrees off of where the donor hive was as far as where the entrance is facing. The idea here is that we're trying to confuse the foragers so that they split up the foragers between these 2 receiver colonies. So what you do here, look at all this animation for you. All right, so you've now taken the resources from that one colony, and you've put them to 2 different colonies evenly that are now facing different directions than the original colony. What happens is as our bees come back, oh, come on, animation, let's work. Yay, as our bees come back, the foragers come back, they're confused because now the donor hive that was their original hive is not there. And by having those two hives kind of facing where the original hive was, so you're right where the original hive was, you're just facing two hives where that original hive essentially was. Essentially, they get confused. And the idea is that they split you essentially are going to have foragers split the difference. So you'll end up with a pretty even distribution of bees between the two. If you don't end up with an even distribution, what you can do is you can wait about a week and then you can swap the two hives, the positions of the two hives, which will then, if you have a hive that's got a ton of the foragers in one and not very many in the other, you swap their positions during the middle of the day, and the foragers that were part of the big one will come back to the smaller colony, and so you'll kind of redistribute them that way. So that's one way you can do that. The even split, again, you don't have to find the queen. You can come back 4 days later. One of them's going to have a queen that's laying. The other one's not going to have an egg, so you can tell which one's queenless that way. You can add a queen to this, or you can just let them raise a queen because you have distributed all the resources equally, including those egg frames in this situation. All right, the side-by-side split. So this is a variation of the even split, and essentially kind of is the same concept, but instead of the two hives facing each other where the original hive was, you essentially put the two hives facing the same direction, just right in front of where the original hive was, or right where the original hive was. All right, so let's look at this. So what we've got, again, we've got our bees that are out in the landscape, those foragers out there. We're going to split these two hives up into two, and now those foragers, because you're splitting the difference between the entrance of that original donor hive with these two hives, the foragers, the idea, again, is the foragers come back and they split the difference. So again, another easy way to do that. And in this situation also, you can do, same thing. You can add a queen, or you can let them raise a queen from an egg if the timing is right for virgins to be able to get mated. All right, now there's also times when you're going to open up your colony and you just realize that the colony is ready for swarming. This happens to all of us. Sometimes there's colonies that just build up way faster than we expect them to. And you get into a situation like this where you open a colony, you tip back your box, and you see queen cells all over them. And you see on this picture, we've got some capped queen cells, we've got some uncapped queen cells, but essentially we've got all of this going on in here right now. And we have got to do something to mitigate this. Now, there's two different ways that you can approach this. And I'm going to start with one way, which is just to prevent the swarm. And then we're going to get into another way where you can utilize these for something. All right, so the first thing is preventing the swarm. So how do we actually do that in this situation? We've got a box that is literally on its way. Like, those queen cells are capped. Who knows when they're going to hatch? It could be days. But essentially, it's happening very fast. You've got to do something, or it's going to be an issue. So let's see what we can do. One of the methods that's widely used and has been used for, the last 100 years has been the Demaree method. So this was a method that was developed by George Demaree, and basically the objective around this swarm control method is that we're trying to do a few different things. One, we're trying to separate that unsealed brood, so that brand new brood and those eggs, from the queen. So we're essentially trying to relieve pressure where all of that brood that's just freshly laid, that's going to be there for at least 21 days. 21 days or less in the case of workers. That is going to be something that we want to get out of there, because that's space that's going to be occupied for some time. Our big objective is to reduce overcrowding. We want to give the queen tons of space. We just want to overwhelm her with space to be able to lay. And space, again, does not mean foundation. Space means drawn wax, drawn comb on frames. What this essentially creates is this situation in which the hive believes that it is swarmed. And so that's what we're trying to mimic here. We're trying to mimic a situation where the hive thinks it swarmed, but it actually didn't. We just have manipulated it to think it has. All right, so this is what this looks like. And it's an advanced technique, but it's not something that's too hard to understand. Essentially, we have a hive here. say this is our congested hive. We have our brood chamber down here. The brood is what is in this pink color. So follow that color to see where the brood's going as we break down this box. In addition, you have honey supers out here. All of this is jam-packed in here. And so we were in the situation like the picture. We have swarm cells. We are imminently ready we're getting ready to swarm at any point. And so we need to do something now. What you do is you go through the box and you find the queen, and you take the queen and 2 frames of capped brood only, older brood, so capped brood, and put her in that bottom box. 2 frames. Everything else is drawn wax. So she has now, in a 10-frame setup, she's got 8 frames of drawn wax, and there are only 2 frames of brood in there. The brood frames are going to have some nurse bees on them, and the bees in the brood that are getting ready to hatch will be the next generation of nurse bees to support her. And this is the old queen down here. So you have your old queen down here with 2 capped brood frames and open drawn wax on the rest of the frames. The next thing you put in here is a queen excluder. The reason you put a queen excluder in here is because we are trying to sequester her in that bottom box. We do not want her to be able to leave that bottom box. The next thing we do is we put the excluder on, so she's down there, and then the next thing we do is we put on supers. So the supers that we have on are the ones that we took from that original hive, and we're now putting there in the middle. You want to have a couple supers in this situation. The reason that you want that is you're creating space between the top brood chamber and the bottom brood chamber where that old queen is. So you've got this space that you've got built in there. Now you put another queen excluder on. The reason you're putting another queen excluder on is because we're about to put all the rest of that brood up in the top box. And because there is eggs in here in this brood, there can be the risk of them starting to draw more queen cells. Also, in this situation where you had all those queen cells on there, that's where you're moving all of these. So all of the existing queen cells are on there as well. So any queen cells that are going to come out of this colony are going to be in this top box, and we've got to have an excluder on there just in case we have queens hatch. All right, in that top box, you put all your capped, uncapped brood, pollen, and nectar all goes in the top. All goes in the top. All that congestion goes right up top. Now, at this point in time, what's happening here is with this arrangement, the queen essentially now has plenty of room in the bottom chamber to lay. The foragers are totally unaffected because they can continue to forage, and the nurse bees, for the most part, are just hanging out up in the top chamber with all of that brood. And so you've relieved a ton of pressure in that bottom box. Now, all the bees, except for the queen, can move about freely in this situation. The only thing that's confined is the old queen in the bottom and potentially any new queens that you have that emerge from the top. What do you do after this? So in the situation where you're doing this and you've got existing queen cells, you've put those all in that top box, the next step to this is after a week, you're going to go to that top box and you're going to check to make sure if you have swarm cells or not. So you gave it a week. If you're in a situation where you've got things that are already capped, you might have already had a queen emerge at this time. But essentially, by going back in a week, you're going to get a good update on what's going on. And what we see that happens during this time is that we have a decision to make. In this situation, you can look at this as you've almost got 2 colonies going at the same time on one stack of boxes. You've got that queen down below, the old queen that's working with the space you gave her, but you have excuse me, you have queen cells up top and potentially queens that are hatching up there that are resources for you. So at this point in time, you need to make a decision. Do I destroy those queen cells that are up in that top, or do I destroy the queens that are being raised there just to keep that box as one? Or do I decide I want to make nukes out of these? These are perfectly good frames to make nukes from. They have queen cells on them, or if you have a queen that is hatched, you have a queen there to do something with. And so you could create a nuke from this situation as well from that top box. And now you've relieved all this pressure on the original hive that you ran the risk of losing half of the bees with, and now you've turned it into 2 colonies. That's a win-win situation, in my opinion. You didn't lose your bees, and you increased the number of colonies you got. So that is a really, really interesting spot where you now have turned what is viewed as a negative situation most of the time into a very positive situation in which you actually have decisions to make. If, now do I want to actually increase the size of my apiary, or maybe I don't? Maybe I want to destroy these queen cells and destroy that queen and just keep this as one colony. You can bring this together later on is one of the key factors to consider. Is after swarm pressure is gone, you can essentially recombine this hive into one and then keep rocking and rolling. And so that's a really interesting technique to utilize. And I'm actually, I think it's in 2 slides. I'm gonna actually show you a modified version of this by Randy Oliver, which does just that. It takes this colony, it does this kind of modified Demaree method, and then we recombine it right before the honey flow so that we have this big, huge colony of bees that's going into the honey flow, and we've avoided swarms. So in the end, with this whole situation with the Demaree method, what we did is we prevented a swarm and we potentially got some nukes, or maybe we got some queens that we were able to sell in that situation. So win-win, right? So the next one that we have here is a modified Demaree method. This is something that Randy Oliver has put together from Scientific Beekeeping. And essentially what it is it's essentially doing kind of what we talked about in the Demaree method, but it's taking advantage of the ability of the box with the young brood in it. It's taking advantage of them raising a queen and letting that colony kind of proliferate with a queen, and then combining the colony with the donor colony right before the honey flow, so that you end up with this huge colony. So what we're doing here, and let me grab my cursor. We have a colony that's ready to swarm, just like in the picture. You've got all these queen cells on the bottom of these frames. What you do is you do a split. So you essentially have the 2 sealed brood frames, just like in the regular Demaree, in the bottom chamber with the old queen. You add a queen excluder, you put some supers on top, and then you take all of those young bees in the brood and that brood, and you can either 1, put them in an adjacent hive, or 2, you can just put it on top of the parent hive, just like the regular Demaree method. Now, in that situation, this receiver hive that does not have a queen, you can do a couple of things with. You can let them rear a queen, or you can add a new queen at that point. But the idea is that this colony is going to proliferate on its own. What you're trying to do is you're just trying to give them enough time to relieve that pressure in that colony, and then you're going to bring them back together. So then right as the honey flow starts, you recombine these 2 colonies. And so now you have twice the amount of brood is the idea that you would have in one colony. You have these 2 colonies you put together, you let the queen sort it out, and you start supering immediately. And now you've got this really robust colony going into the season, and you've avoided a swarm. You don't increase the number of colonies that you have in this situation. Obviously, you can see that there's variations you can do of this that would allow you to do that. All of these techniques are not hard and fast. You can do variations on any of these, whatever you feel is appropriate, as long as you give them the resources that they need to do these things. And what is that? Well, that is the eggs, cab brood, older brood, capped brood, food, and some space. And that's all you need to do these splits and to be able to really increase in size and apiary, and also do something really creative like this. All right, the last thing I'm going to talk about is the queen rearing split. And this is something that Michael Bush talks about a lot in a lot of his writings, is this kind of this 2-frame split. So essentially what you can do when you've got those queen cells up in that Demaree split is you could take those out and you could essentially create a little mini nuke, and you can use this for queen rearing operations. So what you basically are doing is you're using this as a queen rearing place for queen rearing. So what you're going to do is you're going to create a 2-frame nuke, 1 frame being the frame with the queen cells on it, and another frame is just food. And what you're doing is you're relieving some of the pressure on the donor hive, right? So if you have that top box that's got all this stuff in there, you can take a little bit of that pressure out of there. And you're basically creating a situation where there's everything necessary to raise a queen. This is not a colony that you're going to keep going you know, it's going to continue to build. But if, as long as you continue to take a queen from this and allow them to raise a new one, and you don't let this get out of control, this is a great little queen factory here, and a great opportunity. I mean, you can build a little 2-frame nuke box, put a couple frames in there, raise a queen, and now you have a queen that's banked for things like losing a queen. And that's an important thing to keep in mind. So a really easy technique. So really what you're doing here is essentially you're gonna have a mated queen in about 4 weeks. You take those queen cells, pop them in there, you know, 3 to 4 weeks, depending on what stage the queen cell is in. But you'll have a new queen in 3 to 4 weeks by doing this. So really nice, easy technique. All right, so further considerations, you want to feed after your splits, so you need to make sure that they have plenty of food. Starved splits do not survive. They are definitely hungry, and you need to be feeding them at that time. With splits, if you're putting them in the full-size equipment, you need to have those entrances reduced. This allows them to kind of get situated and not have to be dealing with any kind of robbing situations. It also is a smaller entrance to defend, so that is an important part of this. Swarm prevention, you know, overall is a big part of your job as swarm prevention. And like I said, I hope you look at this as an advantageous thing, not something that's a negative. This is an opportunity for you to increase the size of your apiaries, sell some bees, raise some queens, all sorts of good stuff. You will fail. We all do. It's one of the great joys about being human is learning from our mistakes. But you need to keep at it. The only way you're going to learn how to do this is to do it. And like I said, the worst thing that can happen in any of these situations, if this does not work out and you do not get a queen right colony out of it, the worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to just combine it with another colony and keep moving on. So take a stab at it. Don't be afraid of doing this. It is not rocket science. This is biology. And there's a lot of flexibility within biology. So please note that, you know, this is something that you want to master and want to be able to take advantage of. There is so much demand for nukes right now. Locally produced nukes, nobody hangs on to them. I mean, we literally we're generally sold out of nukes every year by February. There is such a high demand on them throughout the beekeeping industry. And, you know, one of the things to keep in mind is as a beekeeper and as a member of this community, you should look at it as a responsibility, as a duty to help your fellow, you know, beekeepers by supplying locally produced nukes. It's how we mitigate some of the importation of colonies, which is also an important part about supporting our own industries in our own respective states. So I hope you enjoyed this lecture. I'll look forward to talking to you at the next one.